I buried my wife on a Wednesday. The service was small, just a few close friends, a quiet chapel, and the steady sound of wind moving through the trees. After 43 years together, there was no speech that could capture what Linda meant to me, so I didn't try. I simply laid a white rose beside her and whispered goodbye. I thought the hard part was over. But the hardest part came when I walked back into the house we had shared for more than 4 decades. I expected silence, emptiness, the kind of stillness that wraps around grief like a heavy winter coat. But instead, I found something I never could have imagined. 20 motorcycles were parked on my front lawn. My screen door was ripped clean off its hinges, and deep voices rumbled from inside my home like a storm gathering in the distance. My name is Frank Miller. I'm 67 years old, retired from the Postal Service. I don't own a gun. I've never been in a fight, and up until that moment, I had never had any run-ins with biker gangs. But when I saw my home, the place where Linda and I spent Christmas mornings and argued about paint colors and laughed over burnt toast, being torn apart by strangers, something inside me broke. I should have called the police. That would have been the smart thing. But smart didn't matter anymore. Linda was gone. The house was no longer ours. I had nothing left to lose. So I stepped through my own broken doorway with shaking hands and a heart that didn't know whether to break or burn. What I saw inside didn't make any sense. 20 men, all of them in black leather vests covered in patches, were tearing my living room apart. One of them held my wedding photo. Another was pulling books off the shelf. A third was prying open a floor vent with a screwdriver. It was like they were looking for something they were sure I was hiding. That was the moment everything changed. That was the moment when grief met chaos, and somehow out of that collision came something I never expected. Hope.
The biggest of them spotted me first. He was built like a wall, arms thick with ink, beard reaching his chest. His eyes narrowed when he saw me standing there in my funeral suit, still smelling faintly of church incense and old cologne. He dropped the box he was holding and marched straight toward me like a man with a purpose. My pulse kicked into a sprint. He stopped just a few feet away and said in a voice like gravel, "Where are they?" I blinked, confused. "Where are what?" I asked. And I meant it. I had no idea what they were talking about. He clenched his jaw. "Don't play dumb, old man. We know what's going on here." "I just buried my wife," I said softly, too tired to be angry. "I haven't even taken my shoes off yet." That stopped them. Something shifted in the air, like a storm cloud losing its shape. The other men glanced at each other, the aggression fading from their shoulders. One of them, a shorter guy with a scar across his eyebrow, asked cautiously, "Your wife?" I nodded. "Linda. Cancer. 2 years. Funeral was this morning." The big guy, he wore a patch that said Grizz, pulled out his phone and tapped something on the screen. His brow furrowed as he read. "What's your address?" he asked. 6421 Willow Creek Drive, I replied. For a beat, no one spoke. Then a biker in the corner, he'd been flipping through my photo albums, muttered under his breath, "Oh no." Grizz's face went pale. "We're supposed to be at 6412. That was it. 1 digit flipped. 1 wrong turn. And 20 men had kicked down the door of a grieving widower's home, looking for something or someone that didn't exist here. I looked around at my living room. The place was in ruins. Cushions torn, drawers emptied, shelves ransacked. And then I saw it. Linda's china cabinet, smashed. Her teacup collection shattered across the floor like fallen stars. 43 years of collecting, gone in minutes. "You broke her china," I whispered, not even sure they could hear me. My legs gave out, and I sank to the floor. My hand reached for a shard of porcelain, the one with the tiny roses she loved so much, the one her mother gave her on our wedding day. And I cried, not for the broken glass, not even for the house, but for Linda, for being gone, for coming home to destruction when I needed peace, for the silence that should have been hers, but now was filled with the echo of boots and voices and confusion. None of them moved. Not a single biker said a word as I wept in the wreckage. These were men who looked like they feared nothing, but at that moment they were still, like statues, like they knew they had stepped into something sacred and shattered it by mistake. Then, quietly, Grizz knelt beside me. "Sir," he said, his voice rough but steady, "we made a terrible mistake, and I don't know how to make it right, but I will try." I didn't answer. I couldn't. My world had already been cracked open once that week. This was just the aftershock. I sat there on the floor for a long time, surrounded by pieces of my wife's life. The light through the window caught the edge of a teacup shard, and for a moment it looked like stained glass. Linda used to say her collection wasn't worth much to anyone else, but it meant the world to her, to us. Each cup had a story, a place we'd been, a Sunday market, a small-town fair, even the one we found in a thrift shop during a snowstorm. They were memories you could hold in your hands, and now they were dust. I didn't expect comfort from the men in that room. They looked like they belonged on the back of a magazine warning you not to make eye contact. But something about my silence shifted them. One of them, broad shoulders, tattooed hands, picked up a photo that had fallen from the wall. He dusted it off and placed it gently back on the table without a word.
Another sat on the edge of the couch, avoiding the broken china. "Sir," he said slowly, "why were you home alone today? Don't you have any family?" "No," I said. "Just Linda. We couldn't have children. She was it for me." He nodded, like he understood more than he let on. And then, trying to make sense of what just happened, I asked, "Why are you even here? Who were you looking for?" Grizz stood up, ran a hand through his beard, and hesitated. Then he said, "We got a tip about this street, about a house being used for something sick. Kids, locked in a basement. We don't take chances with that kind of thing." My breath caught. "You mean next door?" He looked at me. 6412. You said this was 6421, right? I nodded. Slowly. "Yeah. Next door is 6412. The Bakers live there." He pulled out a small notebook and jotted something down. "What do you know about them?" "Not much," I admitted. "They moved in about 2 years ago, right after the couple before them passed away. Their kids sold the house fast. Cash deal, I think. The Bakers keep to themselves, don't really talk to anyone." "What about their vehicles?" Grizz asked. "They've got a white van, comes and goes at odd hours, mostly at night. Sometimes it's parked around back. I thought maybe they worked night shifts. Anything strange about the house itself?" I thought for a moment. "The basement windows have been covered since they moved in. Black plastic or something. I never saw the lights on down there. Just assumed they were doing renovations." Grizz's eyes narrowed. He stepped aside and made a phone call, speaking in low tones. After a moment, he said just 3 words. "Go quiet. Confirm." Then he turned to me and said, "Sir, I know we've done a lot of damage tonight, But if what you've told me is true, we may be in the right place after all, just not the right address."
And for the first time that night, something colder than grief settled over me. A chill that had nothing to do with loss and everything to do with the house I had passed 100 times without ever wondering what was inside. The room grew quiet after Grizz made his call. The other men stood still, waiting, listening, the tension settling over all of us like a thick blanket. I sat on the edge of what used to be Linda's favored chair, trying to steady my breathing. I didn't know exactly what these men were involved in, but I could tell whatever they did, they took it seriously. And whatever they thought was happening next door was far bigger than a simple misunderstanding about street numbers. It felt like only a few minutes passed, though later I learned it was closer to 15. Then Grizz's phone buzzed. He looked down at the screen, and I saw his expression change in a way I hadn't seen before. The bravado was gone. The hardness in his jaw disappeared. What remained was something heavy, something shaken. He answered with a low, steady voice. "Talk to me." Whoever was on the other end spoke quickly, too quietly for me to hear, but I watched Grizz's eyes tighten like each word cut a little deeper. His hand balled into a fist at his side. When the person finished, Grizz closed his eyes for a moment and exhaled. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a slow release of breath that told me everything had changed. Then he said a single sentence. "Call the police. Now." The room froze. The other bikers straightened. A few exchanged glances. They didn't question him. They didn't ask why. They moved instantly, as if they had practiced this 100 times before. Grizz hung up the phone and looked at me. "Sir, I need you to stay inside. Officers will be here soon." His voice was different now, steadier but heavier. "What did they find?" I asked, my throat dry. He hesitated for the first time since I'd met him. Then he answered. "There are children in that basement. 7 of them."
My heart dropped. "Children? 7?" I whispered. He nodded once. "They're alive. That's all I'm going to say right now, but they need help." Those words felt unreal. Children, next door, for 2 entire years. So close to my home that some nights I could have thrown a pebble and hit their window. I thought of Linda, sitting on the porch, sipping tea, humming to herself as the sun went down. All that time, life in our little neighborhood had carried on like nothing was wrong. "We walk past things we don't want to see," Grizz said, almost to himself. "Most people do. That's how these things stay hidden." I felt cold. Not the kind of cold that comes from weather, but the kind that settles in your bones when the world suddenly tilts and you realize the truth has been living right beside you. Within minutes, the distant sound of sirens grew louder, filling the quiet street. Blue and red lights flashed across my broken windows, painting the walls with streaks of color. The baker's house, normally dark and uninviting, was now lit up like a stage under harsh lights. A team approached the side door. With a quiet command, they entered. No shouting, no chaos, but just precise, trained movement. It was strangely calm, almost gentle. They were there to rescue, not to fight. After a few minutes that felt like hours, an officer emerged carrying a small figure wrapped in a blanket. The child blinked at the bright lights, clinging to the officer's shoulder. Another child followed, then another, each one bundled carefully, escorted toward waiting ambulances. Their faces were tired, pale, unsure of what was happening, but they were safe. They were out.
I felt something in my chest loosen, like a knot pulled apart by warm hands. I didn't know their names. I didn't know where they were from, but I knew one thing. They deserved a life far better than whatever had been happening behind those covered windows. Grizz stood beside me, arms crossed, watching quietly. "This is why we do what we do," he said softly. "Not for trouble, not for headlines, for this." I nodded slowly. There was nothing else to say. As the ambulances pulled away and officers continued moving in and out of the baker's house, I realized that my world had expanded and cracked open in ways I didn't expect. I had woken that morning to bury the woman I loved. By nightfall, I was witnessing something that would change the course of my life and the lives of 7 children forever. By the time the last police cruiser pulled away and the neighborhood returned to its eerie stillness, I was standing alone in my doorway again. Only now the silence felt different. Not empty, but heavy with meaning, as if something sacred had passed through and left a trace behind. I thought that would be the end of it, that the bikers would disappear into the night like a strange dream, and I'd be left with my grief and a broken front door. But I was wrong. Around midnight, I heard the deep rumble of engines returning. One by one, the motorcycles pulled back into my driveway. But this time, the men who stepped off them didn't carry weapons or suspicion. They carried toolboxes, lumber, buckets of paint, and quiet determination. Grizz stood at the front and said simply, "We're fixing your house tonight. No arguments." I didn't argue. I didn't have the strength. But I also didn't expect what came next. For the next 6 hours, 20 men worked through the night like a crew on a mission. They replaced the broken door with a sturdier one. They patched up drywall, swept up glass, straightened furniture, and picked up every fragment of my wife's shattered teacups with surprising gentleness. One of them, his nickname was Moose, took the time to glue several of the cups back together, piece by piece. His hands were enormous, covered in grease and old scars, but somehow steady as a clock. He told me his grandmother had a collection just like Linda's, and he remembered how much they meant to her. That night, he worked for hours, restoring what he could. Some were too far gone to save, but many weren't. And watching him work, I felt something I hadn't felt in days: peace. By dawn, my house looked better than it had in years. The floors didn't creak anymore. The walls had fresh paint. The door was solid. The teacups sat in their cabinet again, not perfect, but whole enough to remind me of love instead of loss. Before they left, Grizz handed me a small card. It had a number on it and one word: Guardian. He said, "Anything you need, anytime, you call this number." I looked at him and asked, "Why go through all this? For a stranger?" He paused and said, "Because we broke your door on the worst day of your life. Because we destroyed something that mattered. And because you didn't scream at us. You helped us find what really mattered. Those kids are safe because you paid attention. That means something to us." In the weeks that followed, the bikers didn't vanish. They came by now and then, brought groceries, checked on the repairs, sat with me on the porch in silence when I didn't feel like talking. They weren't loud or overbearing. They just showed up, the way real family sometimes does. Eventually, Grizz told me the truth. Their group, called the Iron Resolve Brotherhood, wasn't just a biker club. They worked with a network that focused on finding missing children, the ones that slip through the cracks that paperwork can't find fast enough. They took tips from locals, followed up where others couldn't, and when needed, acted first and dealt with questions later. "We're not heroes," he said one evening. "We're just tired of pretending someone else will fix it."
That stuck with me. And slowly, I began to help. Not as a biker. I didn't trade my cardigan for leather. But as an old man with a sharp memory and a quiet presence. Turns out, nobody suspects the guy sipping coffee alone at the park bench or reading the newspaper in the corner booth. Over the next year, I passed along 3 pieces of information. Each one helped lead to a rescue. 3 more kids found. 3 more families reunited. And for the first time since Linda passed, I felt useful again. Then, on the anniversary of the night everything changed, Grizz showed up with a gift. A leather vest, made to fit, with one patch
stitched carefully across the back. It didn't say president or enforcer or any of those biker titles. It said, Honorary Guardian. You're one of us now, he said, for life. I never expected any of this. I never wanted adventure or second chances. I just wanted quiet. But sometimes the worst day of your life becomes the doorway to something you never saw coming. Linda used to say, God works in mysterious ways. I never believed her much, but now I do.